Look who finally dropped the act. Here's to the people who played dumb on purpose, the strategists who hid behind a harmless facade, the quiet operators who let everyone assume they were insignificant. Something shifted, and everyone felt it. They thought you were the joke, the one they could dismiss with a laugh and a patronizing pat on the head, a background extra destined to fade into nothing. They built their fragile little kingdoms on the assumption that you'd stay beneath them forever, grateful for leftovers. But you didn't just stand up, you flipped the whole table, sent their chess pieces flying, and shattered their entire game. They're still pulling the splinters out of their pride. Now they're standing there wide-eyed, replaying every conversation, every condescending comment, every moment they underestimated you. They're analyzing it like a crime scene, because to them, it is. You committed the ultimate offense. You refused to be who they decided you were. You didn't follow the script where you stayed small and quiet so they could feel superior. You let them believe you were simple, and that was your first calculated move in a game they didn't realize they were part of. They thought you were slow, but you were studying. They thought you were weak, but you were calculating. They thought you were lost, but you were charting every exit and every crack in their foundation. And when everything lined up perfectly, you didn't announce it or warn them, you just moved. The world tilted, and suddenly they're the ones looking foolish. Now they're scrambling to explain how they missed it, how the person they mocked and dismissed became the one they can't stop thinking about, talking about, or trying to decode. Welcome to your awakening. And understand this, you're only getting started, because what you really did goes way deeper than staying quiet. You performed. You handed them exactly the version of you they expected, one that matched their tiny imaginations and fed their need to feel superior. Every time they talked down to you, you nodded. Every time they explained things you already understood, you acted impressed. Every time they joked at your expense, you laughed, smiled, even thanked them for including you. They mistook that for gratitude. They mistook that for cluelessness. They had no idea they were being watched, measured, outplayed from the very beginning. They thought you were exactly what they needed, harmless, easy to manage, and forever beneath them. But while they were busy feeding their own ego, you were studying them. You were collecting data, memorizing patterns, noting every weakness and every moment of arrogance. You learned how they think, how they operate, what makes them feel safe and what makes them sloppy. You became a student of their psychology without them even noticing. They were so amused by their own superiority that they never bothered to look closely at you. They were so convinced they had you figured out that they missed the fact that you were analyzing them from day one. They played for quick victories while you invested in the long game. And that's the difference between amateurs and architects. Amateurs crave instant validation, immediate applause, proof that they're winning. But you understood a truth they never will. Real power doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly, builds in the dark, grows in the shadows where no one's paying attention. You let them enjoy their brief moments of superiority because you knew all of it was temporary, superficial, and eventually irrelevant. You weren't trying to prove yourself to them. You were building something of your own, brick by brick in silence with no audience cheering you on. Just you, your vision, your discipline, and your refusal to accept the identity they tried to assign you. Every day they underestimated you. You sharpened yourself. You prepared. You grew into the version of yourself they never imagined existed. And then it happened. The moment when you stopped playing their game and switched to yours. They didn't see it coming because they were comfortable, complacent, and lazy, too used to the idea of you as a punchline to realize you were about to deliver a hit that would knock the wind out of them. You walked into that room, that meeting, that situation, and the entire atmosphere changed. Your energy wasn't timid anymore. It was commanding. Your eyes weren't seeking approval. They held authority. Your voice didn't carry apology. It carried certainty, a steel-edged confidence that didn't need volume to dominate the space. And for the first time, they actually looked at you, really looked. What they saw made their stomachs drop. This wasn't the pushover they'd crafted in their minds. This wasn't the doormat who absorbed disrespect with a smile. This was someone shaped by every insult they threw, someone who turned mockery into momentum, someone who used their underestimation as the very fire that forged them. You didn't just change, you evolved. And evolution is never polite, it's abrupt, unforgiving, irreversible. They tried to regain control with another joke, another dismissive attempt to shove you back into the box they built. But the box was already dust, burned, crushed, and scattered across a past they no longer had access to. You weren't going back. You weren't shrinking. You weren't apologizing for taking up space that was always yours anyway. You spoke, and the room fell silent. Not out of respect, at least not yet, but out of pure shock. They couldn't believe the person they were hearing was the same one they thought they had power over. They stared at you like they couldn't believe you were the same person who once nodded along to their nonsense, swallowed their criticism without pushing back, and forced a laugh at their unfunny jokes just to avoid conflict. But yes, it was still you. Just the version of you that existed before they pressured you into shrinking. You simply stopped pretending, stopped performing, and stopped cushioning their fragile egos from the truth of who you actually were. And in that single clean moment of honesty, the entire power structure snapped. The hierarchy they built with you cemented at the bottom collapsed instantly because you weren't playing along anymore. You refused the role they assigned you, rejected the authority they thought they had, and no longer accepted their judgment as truth. You stood there fully, unapologetically yourself, and that alone was enough to overturn the entire dynamic. What came next was almost entertaining. They scrambled to recover, to rewrite history on the spot. Suddenly they claimed they'd always seen your potential, always believed in you, always known you'd rise. Transparent lies from people desperate to protect their pride. As everything they relied on crumbled, they tried to attach themselves to your success, to position themselves as mentors after the fact, supporters in hindsight, believers retroactively. But you remembered every condescending comment, every dismissive tone, every moment they made you feel small for having a vision they were too limited to understand. You didn't need to confront them. Your silence was a verdict they felt in their bones. Some of them got angry, because anger is what people fall back on when their worldview implodes. They couldn't handle being wrong about you, couldn't swallow the fact that their judgment was flawed and their perception shallow. So they lashed out, called you lucky, called you fake, called you everything except the one thing that actually fit, a strategist who played them perfectly. They needed your rise to be a fluke, not the result of you outthinking and outgrowing them. Others retreated inward, suddenly questioning everything. If they misread you so badly, what else had they gotten wrong? If someone they dismissed completely could rise that hard and that fast, what did that say about their ability to judge talent, potential, or worth? You became their crisis of confidence, their personal proof that their whole evaluation system was faulty from the start. And then there were the ones who tried to drift back into your orbit, suddenly warm, suddenly invested, suddenly pretending you'd always been close. They wanted access to whatever force transformed the nobody in their heads into someone they could no longer ignore. But you weren't fooled. You'd earned sharper discernment through pain, and you weren't about to let people who applauded your struggles get anywhere near your victories. Boundaries became your new foundation, and access to you became something people had to earn, not something anyone could assume. They stared at you like they couldn't believe you were the same person who once nodded along to their nonsense, swallowed their criticism without pushing back, and forced a laugh at their unfunny jokes just to avoid conflict. But yes, it was still you, just the version of you that existed before they pressured you into shrinking. You simply stopped pretending, stopped performing, and stopped cushioning their fragile egos from the truth of who you actually were. And in that single clean moment of honesty, the entire power structure snapped. The hierarchy they built with you, cemented at the bottom, collapsed instantly because you weren't playing along anymore. You refused the role they assigned you, rejected the authority they thought they had, and no longer accepted their judgment as truth. You stood there fully, unapologetically yourself, and that alone was enough to overturn the entire dynamic. What came next was almost entertaining. They scrambled to recover, to rewrite history on the spot. Suddenly they claimed they'd always seen your potential, always believed in you, always known you'd rise. Transparent lies from people desperate to protect their pride. As everything they relied on crumbled, they tried to attach themselves to your success, to position themselves as mentors after the fact, supporters in hindsight, believers retroactively. But you remembered every condescending comment, every dismissive tone, every moment they made you feel small for having a vision they were too limited to understand. You didn't need to confront them. Your silence was a verdict they felt in their bones. Some of them got angry, because anger is what people fall back on when their worldview implodes. They couldn't handle being wrong about you, couldn't swallow the fact that their judgment was flawed and their perception shallow. So they lashed out, called you lucky, called you fake, called you everything except the one thing that actually fit: a strategist who played them perfectly. They needed your rise to be a fluke, not the result of you outthinking and outgrowing them. Others retreated inward, suddenly questioning everything. If they misread you so badly, what else had they gotten wrong? If someone they dismissed completely could rise that hard and that fast, what did that say about their ability to judge talent, potential, or worth? You became their crisis of confidence, their personal proof that their whole evaluation system was faulty from the start. And then there were the ones who tried to drift back into your orbit, suddenly warm, suddenly invested, suddenly pretending you'd always been close. They wanted access to whatever force transformed the nobody in their heads into someone they could no longer ignore. But you weren't fooled. You'd earned sharper discernment through pain, and you weren't about to let people who applauded your struggles get anywhere near your victories. Boundaries became your new foundation, and access to you became something people had to earn, not something anyone could assume. The beautiful part, the part that almost feels poetic in its precision, is that by the time your transformation surfaced, you no longer needed anything from them at all. You didn't need validation. You didn't need apologies. You didn't need acknowledgement. And you sure as hell didn't need them to admit they were wrong. You had outgrown the need for their recognition entirely. Your success became its own declaration. Your evolution became its own undeniable evidence. Simply existing at your new level was enough to confirm what you already knew deep down. You had been right about yourself from the start. While they were busy spiraling, rationalizing, rewriting the narrative to soothe their egos, you were already occupied building kingdoms they didn't even have the mental capacity to imagine. And here's the part most people completely miss: the real brilliance behind everything you did. You didn't just act oblivious. You didn't just play dumb. You crafted a psychological greenhouse where everyone around you felt safe, special, and comfortably superior. You let them have the illusion that they were sharper, stronger, more accomplished than at least one person. You let them believe that person was you, and they clung to that belief like it was life support. Humans crave superiority. They don't just enjoy the feeling, they rely on it. It props up their self-worth. It confirms the story they tell themselves about who they are. And because you provided that comforting contrast, they kept you close. They welcomed you into spaces they would have guarded fiercely if they had even a hint of who you truly were. You became their emotional safety blanket, their living proof that they were winning because at least they weren't you. They didn't realize that the person they were underestimating was quietly lapping them in every arena that actually mattered. You engineered a blind spot so massive they could have marched an army straight through it and still missed the threat standing right beside them. They stopped assessing you because threats don't smile politely. Threats don't play small. Threats don't appear grateful for scraps. You made yourself so unassuming that you blended into the background like scenery. Nothing more than an accessory in the narrative they were desperate to be the star of. Meanwhile, you were crafting a story so powerful it would eventually swallow theirs whole. This is where your mastery becomes undeniable. Most people never learn the art of strategic silence. They think power has to be theatrical. Loud voices, big moments, constant self-assertion. They think influence means always being visible, always being heard, always being acknowledged. But you grasped a truth that only the genuinely formidable understand. Sometimes the greatest power comes from being underestimated. Sometimes influence grows best in the shadows, quietly, without an audience. Sometimes the most devastating move is the one no one notices until it's too late to stop it. You sat back and watched with intention, not passivity. Every time they talked over you, you didn't shrink. You observed how they communicate, how their ego works, what triggers their insecurities. Every meeting where they dismissed your ideas became a blueprint of their weaknesses. Every moment they ignored you was a moment you collected intel they had no idea they were giving away. Because they saw you as harmless, they exposed more of themselves than they ever would in front of someone they considered an equal or a competitor. This is where the real winners distinguish themselves. Power isn't about fighting every pointless battle. That's what insecure people do. They waste energy proving themselves in meaningless moments. The ones who actually dominate choose their battles with precision. They wait, they prepare, they gather information, and by the time they engage, victory is not a possibility, it's a certainty. You allowed them 1,000 insignificant wins because those wins cost you nothing. You let them feel superior in moments that were trivial to you so you could claim victory in the moment that mattered, the moment that shifted the entire narrative. That moment wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't accidental timing. It was strategy. Intelligent, long-range, brilliantly executed strategy. It was patience sharpened into a weapon. It was restraint transformed into dominance. That's the kind of thinking that doesn't just separate people, it divides them into categories. The loud ones who only look powerful and the quiet ones who actually are. The pretenders who need attention to feel relevant, and the architects who build empires in silence. The people who talk about winning and the people who plan so thoroughly that winning becomes inevitable. And you were on the right side of that divide the entire time. Let's get brutally specific about that moment. The exact second the entire narrative shifted, the moment that was both quiet and catastrophic at the same time, the moment you finally flipped the table they thought you were chained to. It didn't resemble the dramatic scenes people glorify in movies. There wasn't a spotlight, no trembling voice delivering a final monologue, no cinematic storm outside. The truth is far more cutting. It was subtle, it was internal, it was fundamental, and it devastated them precisely because of how calmly you did it. You didn't snap. You simply stopped participating in a world that was never built for you and started fully operating in one you built yourself. Maybe it was a business move they swore up and down you'd never have the intelligence or courage to execute. Maybe it was a relationship they insisted you were too weak, too dependent, too afraid to walk away from. Maybe it was a new path they mocked, a dream they dismissed, a boundary they labeled rude because it forced them to confront their entitlement. It could have been anything, but the core was the same. You made a decision rooted in self-respect, not fear. And that decision detonated like a bomb under the foundation of their delusions. That single choice was more than a shift. It was a seismic event. They felt it immediately. It was the emotional equivalent of a sudden vacuum. The power they were siphoning from you disappeared. Their ability to belittle you evaporated. Their role as the superior one shattered. The hierarchy they relied on didn't crumble slowly. It disintegrated instantly, because it required your participation to exist in the first place. You stopped asking and started declaring. You stopped waiting and started moving. You stopped hoping they'd recognize your worth and started living like someone who already understood it. And that alone was enough to make every moment they underestimated you flash before their eyes like a humiliating slideshow of their own arrogance. Here's what really shook them. The table flip was never about them. That's the part their egos couldn't process. They assumed your evolution must be revenge, that you were trying to prove them wrong, that you needed their recognition to feel validated. But no, you didn't rise to spite them. You rose because you finally realized the entire game was rigged. They had designed the rules, rigged the scoreboard, and tilted the table so you'd always be the one losing. And the only way to win a game designed for your failure is to quit playing entirely. You didn't flip their table in rebellion, you walked away from it because you were done settling for scraps when you were capable of building your own feast. They expected you to care about their reactions, to fight for their approval even in your awakening, to cling to their validation like it still held value. They couldn't comprehend that you had already detached from them. You were already vibrating at a frequency they couldn't detect, let alone reach. They were still analyzing your last sentence while you were busy building an entire future they wouldn't be invited to. And that distance, that massive uncrossable gap, is what true liberation feels like. Watching people dissect a version of you that no longer exists, trying to decode a person who outgrew their entire worldview. They were stuck analyzing your footprints while you were already miles ahead, charting territory they didn't even know was on the map. The most powerful part of the entire moment was its finality. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't a mood. It wasn't a phase. It was irreversible. Because here's the truth. You cannot unflip a table. You cannot pretend you didn't see through their manipulation. You cannot shrink back into a role you've already outgrown. Once someone sees you fully, authentically, undeniably, once the mask drops and the real you steps forward, there is no putting that revelation back into the box of their comfortable lies. Once you revealed your power, once you stopped pretending, once you claimed the space that was always yours, the old dynamic didn't just weaken, it died. It was buried. And yes, you were the one holding the shovel, lowering the past into the ground with the calm confidence of someone who knows they'll never return to that version of themselves again. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment they finally realized you weren't playing their game. You had been building your own empire while they were busy underestimating you. And the best part? You're just getting started. What you did didn't just rattle the handful of people who openly underestimated you. It sent a shockwave through the entire environment around you. Your transformation wasn't confined to isolated moments or individual relationships. It altered the landscape of your entire life. It didn't just change how a few people treated you. It changed the tone, the energy, the hierarchy, and the social structure you existed in. It rewrote the unspoken rules everyone had gotten comfortable following. When you rose, it didn't just shift your world. It forced everyone else to shift with you. People who had absolutely nothing to do with your story started behaving differently. Friends of friends, co-workers who barely noticed you, acquaintances who used to forget your name. They all felt the shift. Because transformation on that level isn't subtle. It isn't quiet. It radiates, it travels. It hits the room before you even walk in. It's the kind of energy people don't fully understand, but they feel in their chest, in their gut, in the back of their mind. Suddenly, people who once treated you like background scenery were leaning in, paying attention, recalibrating their approach. Doors that had been locked for years weren't locked anymore. Rooms that had been difficult to enter felt strangely accessible. You weren't chasing opportunities anymore, they were drifting your way. Conversations that once kept you on the sidelines were now orbiting around you. People who didn't even acknowledge your presence before were watching your every move, curious, cautious, or outright afraid. And none of this happened because you changed who you were. It happened because you stopped hiding who you were. You stopped shrinking. You stopped filtering. You stopped toning yourself down to make insecure people comfortable. You stopped making your greatness digestible for small minds. You took the dimmer switch that others had been twisting for years and snapped it off entirely. You decided to shine at full power. And the brightness was impossible to ignore. It illuminated everything, including the insecurities of those around you. But here's the reality most people don't want to confront. Not everyone was built to handle that light. Some people were deeply, viscerally threatened by your evolution. They preferred the older version of you, the predictable, compliant, easily controlled version. The one who didn't challenge them, intimidate them, or reflect their failures back at them. Your growth exposed them. It reminded them that they too could have changed if they'd chosen to. It forced them to face the uncomfortable truth that staying small was their choice, not their fate. You became a walking reminder of their wasted time, their abandoned dreams, their unmade decisions. And that made you dangerous, because people fear anything that forces them to look in the mirror. And when people feel threatened, they react predictably. They started rewriting stories, distorting the truth, minimizing what you accomplished. You weren't driven, you were lucky. You didn't grind, you had connections. You didn't strategize, you had help. You didn't rise, you got a break. Anything that helped them avoid admitting the clear, painful truth. You did the work they were too afraid, too lazy, or too comfortable to do. Your rise forced them to confront their own stagnation, and their egos couldn't survive that truth intact. So they did what insecure people always do. They built excuses to protect themselves. They couldn't accept that your success happened in spite of them, not because of them. But here's the part they didn't see coming. While they were scrambling to justify your evolution, there were others watching you with entirely different eyes. The underestimated, the overlooked, the silenced. The ones who had been told, not you, not now, not possible, their whole lives. They saw your transformation, and something clicked inside them. You didn't mean to become a symbol, but you did. You became evidence, undeniable proof that the system wasn't as rigid as it pretended to be. You became a real-time demonstration that the underdog wasn't powerless, that labels weren't destiny, that the person everyone dismissed could become the one everyone watches. Your rise wasn't just personal, it was collective. It activated people. It inspired them. It showed them that the world's hierarchy isn't fixed, it's fragile. It isn't permanent. It's a story people accept until someone stands up and proves otherwise. Because when you broke through the ceiling, it didn't just crack for you, it cracked for everyone watching. People started reevaluating their own lives, their own limits, their own excuses. They began questioning the lies they'd internalized. They began rethinking the roles they'd accepted. You didn't speak a word to them, but your success delivered a message louder than anything you could have said. Meanwhile, the entire ecosystem around you reorganized. The power dynamics shifted, boundaries hardened, expectations changed. People who once ignored you now watched you closely. People who once stood above you suddenly felt beneath you. People who once believed they understood you realized they never knew you at all. You didn't just change your position, you changed the gravity of the environment. Everything started moving around you. You became the center of the orbit. And that's what real transformation does. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for acknowledgement. It doesn't ask if anyone's ready. It arrives. It disrupts. It redefines. It rearranges everything. And that's exactly what you did. Your energy didn't just elevate. It became the axis. Everything around you started rotating around. The same people who once brushed off your presence suddenly found themselves adjusting their behavior based on your actions. Your decisions stopped being footnotes and became case studies. Your growth became something people analyzed, dissected, tried to reverse engineer. Your choices, once mocked, ignored, or dismissed, turned into blueprints for others who finally realized you weren't just moving differently. You were operating on an entirely different level. People started asking new questions. Questions they never would have considered before your transformation happened. Not how do we fit into the system, but how do we break the system and rebuild something better the way they did. You didn't simply reject their rules. You showed everyone those rules were optional. And by refusing to play their game, you forced the entire environment to shift to match yours. But let's get brutally honest about something people will never fully understand unless they've lived it. The weight of being underestimated. That weight isn't just an annoyance. It's a slow bleed, a grinding, day-by-day erosion of the spirit. Being underestimated is one of the most psychologically damaging experiences a person can endure, because it forces you to exist in a world where the truth of who you are is constantly being distorted or denied. It's exhausting. It's painful. It's demoralizing in ways that most people can't even articulate. They saw you as a rough draft when you were already a finished masterpiece. They heard your voice and labeled it noise because they couldn't comprehend the frequency you were speaking on. They watched you work and called it luck because acknowledging your discipline would force them to confront their own laziness. They saw your resilience and called it stubbornness because they couldn't imagine surviving what you've survived. They saw your potential and tried to shrink it because it made them uncomfortable with their own stagnant lives. And living in that constant dissonance, knowing who you are while being surrounded by people who insist on projecting a smaller version of you, creates pressure that can destroy a person. It turns everyday life into an uphill battle, not just against circumstances, but against perception, against ignorance, against the never-ending weight of others' limited imaginations. But instead of crushing you, that pressure forged you into something unbreakable. And here's the part that hits hardest. You carried that weight in silence. You didn't complain. You didn't lash out. You didn't demand recognition. You didn't beg anyone to see your potential. You didn't throw your accomplishments in their faces hoping for acknowledgement. You didn't waste breath explaining yourself to people incapable of understanding you. You kept your head down and your soul intact. You kept moving forward even on days when the world tried to convince you that you had no right to move at all. You kept building when no one was watching. You kept learning when no one cared. You kept improving when no one noticed. You kept believing in yourself when literally no one else did. That is strength on a level most people will never reach, not because they can't, but because they simply won't. Being able to validate yourself in a world determined to misunderstand you requires a rare combination of emotional intelligence, discipline, and mental resilience. You became your own witness, your own cheerleader, your own mentor, your own source of truth. You were forced to practice a form of self-trust most people never even learn exists. You became the kind of person who could stand alone in the dark, surrounded by doubt, fueled only by your inner knowing, and still walk forward. That is not normal strength. That is extraordinary strength. That is the kind of strength that terrifies people, inspires people, and reshapes entire environments. Because here's the hidden truth. People weren't just underestimating you. They were underestimating what that pressure was doing to you. They thought they were holding you back, keeping you small, limiting your possibilities. But in reality, they were unknowingly sharpening you, tempering you, toughening you. Every slight, every dismissal, every insult, every doubt became raw material for your evolution. The weight they put on you didn't crush you. It became the resistance that built your power. And eventually that power grew too large to contain. It didn't explode outward in anger. It expanded silently, steadily, inevitably, until suddenly the world around you had to reorganize itself to match the person you had become. You carried that weight for years and it didn't break you. It built you. It revealed you. It crowned you. And now the same people who underestimated you are forced to navigate a reality shaped by the very person they tried to diminish. They don't just see your energy, they revolve around it. And that's what true transformation looks like. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please consider contributing through Buy Me a Coffee. This helps us continually improve our content to offer you the best. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No gift is too small. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity helps spread God's word and brings hope to others. Don't stop here. Watch our next video for powerful revelations about the signs that reveal you are the chosen one. We've enjoyed following this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Keep shining brightly and embrace your destiny with courage. See you next time. Blessings to all the beautiful souls from the Enlighten Wisdom.